Hey everyone! For anyone who's interested to know more about what could be awaiting Western Europe, studying the Balkans is an absolute must, and Skopje, the capital of Macedonia, is a very interesting case study. So do you think that diversity is a strength, or that Muslims will integrate in the UK or in Germany? In that case, stay tuned, because learning from the Balkans is an absolute must. Allahu Akbar. There aren't many cities in Europe where the contrast between the western part and the Islamic part can be noticed as strongly as it can here. Immediately after arriving in the city, the first thing that can be noticed are the very large Greek statues that can be seen everywhere. And to be honest, they do look a bit comical, and they often do not match very well with the environment. On the central square, for example, there is a fountain with a huge pillar in the middle, with Greek soldiers carved into it, and on the top of the pillar there is a gigantic horse, and sitting on the horse is Alexander the Great. Walking to the other side of the square, you can see a building that is a bit reminiscent of Caesar's palace in Las Vegas. Immediately after arriving in the city myself, I had to laugh out loud at these statues. They are way too exaggerated, over the top. But that was before I found out what's going on in Macedonia, how these statues can be explained and what political forces led to them. It is basically as follows. This is the European part. If you cross this bridge, you will end up experiencing a little culture shock. That's right. On the other side of the bridge there is the Islamic part of the city. Macedonia has a huge Muslim population. And of course, as in any other Western country where Islam is present, there are certain problems. And these problems tend to get more intense as the percentage of the population that is Muslim increases. Actually finding out what percentage of the population in Macedonia is Muslim turned out to be quite hard. According to certain sources they are 30 to 35% of the population. According to other sources they are 25% of the population. And according to other sources they are 10 to 15%. I quickly found out that politically speaking, the main divergence in the country is between the political parties representing the country's Western population and the political parties representing the Muslim population. The issues of power balance between the two communities even led to a short war back in the year 2001, which took a couple of months and which was ended by the Ohrid Agreement, excuse my pronunciation, which is basically a peace deal. Researching Islam in Macedonia online, you will quickly identify the type of problems that you would expect given the fundamental difference between Western civilization and Islam. For example, there are problems with radicalization, radical imams preaching in certain mosques, and of course Turkey's Erdogan is actively trying to influence the region. So the same thing that the Turkish regime is doing in the Netherlands, Germany and Austria, they are also doing in the Balkans. Erdogan meddling in the Balkans. Erdogan radical Islamist projects in Macedonia, and so on. And of course on Al Jazeera, some article written by someone from Mecca claimed a position of victimhood for the Muslims in Macedonia. On the other side of the divide between Western civilization and Islam, there are the Westerners, who have increasingly gotten more frustrated with the situation in their country. Macedonians attempting to build an Orthodox church in the middle of a village inhabited by mostly Muslims. Nationalists storming the parliament, injuring a Muslim member of parliament. And frequent reports about so-called ethnic tensions running high in Macedonia. And then there are the regional powers and geopolitical entities that are concerned about growing tensions in Macedonia. Isn't diversity a strength? So let's return to Skopje and explain these statues. We know for a fact that Islam, just like any other totalitarian political system, wants to dominate the public space. It wants to be seen and heard as much as possible in order to emphasize its overwhelming presence. Islamic headscarves, high towers, loud call to prayers that can be heard everywhere. Now in order to balance this out on the other side, the Western side, you're gonna need something that balances out the overwhelming impact that Islam has on the public space. So you're gonna need something that dominates the public space as much as Islam does. And then suddenly these overwhelming statues make total sense. And yes, these statues were actually built quite recently in 2014 by a so-called quote-unquote populist party that got into power. These statues are there to emphasize as strongly as possible that this is Europe and not the Islamic world. These statues are a desperate response coming from a Western population trying to cope with an increasing number of Muslims in their country. And as you can expect, an Islamic news outlet like Al Jazeera complains that the statues don't represent the Muslim population and that they exclude the Islamic part of the history of the region. When I asked some of the people in the city what they thought about the statues, I got a very wide range of different responses. A Muslim host in a tea shop in the Islamic part of the city, where there were only men sitting inside, didn't like the statues. A girl on the bus jokingly mentioned that she'd lost count of the number of horses in the city. A man in an Italian coffee bar didn't like the quote-unquote fake history, but when talking to him further he admitted that there were problems in Macedonia, and that he does worry a lot about the fate of Western Europe. The owner of the hostel we stayed in openly admitted that he votes for the populist party and was glad to finally meet someone from Western Europe who, quote, talks the way I talk. Another lady told us that she likes hanging out at the Turkish bazaar in the Islamic part of the city, but that she didn't feel comfortable being there in the evening. There are certain tea and coffee places in the Islamic part where women are not recommended to enter. There are only men sitting there in the evening, and unaware European women entering the bar will get stared down and frowned upon by the men. So what are some of the lessons that us Western and Northern Europeans, Americans, Canadians and Australians can learn from this? The first lesson is that Islam does not integrate. European or Western civilization and Islam do not mix. Both exist in separate spaces. Islam doesn't assimilate into European civilization, and European civilization doesn't assimilate into Islam. The second lesson is that Western civilization and Islam cannot peacefully coexist. And if they do anyway, there are tensions lurking beneath the surface that can erupt at any moment. The situation in Macedonia is a frozen conflict. There have been tensions. There has been a short war. There now is a peace deal. But there's still tensions. The third lesson is that perhaps a frozen conflict with a peace deal is a best case scenario. A frozen conflict that constantly needs to be calmed down. Constant negotiations and talks and new negotiations and new talks in order to not let the situation escalate again. The fourth lesson is that this type of diversity is not a strength. You ever listen to Justin Trudeau?
Diversity.
Don't listen to him. The man is an imbecile. The fifth lesson is that the Visegrad 4 countries are absolutely right and that Western Europe is absolutely wrong. The Visegrad 4 countries have learned from the Balkan and Western Europe hasn't. And therefore, as time goes by, Western Europe will increasingly become like the Balkan, and the Visegrad 4 nations will increasingly become the heart of European civilization. The sixth lesson is that this situation is best to be avoided completely, as this situation is irreparable and irreversible. I can probably expand this list, but I think you already got the point a while ago. Learn from the Balkan, do not end up like the Balkan. Not learning from the Balkan will have you end up like the Balkan.
Der Diskurs über Integration im Allgemeinen, also Integration ist ein ziemlich unbeliebtes Wort bei Juma, weil wir uns natürlich nirgendwohin integrieren müssen, aber dass wir immer wieder quasi damit also konfrontiert werden mit diesem Begriff und auch mit der Forderung, sich zu integrieren, das ist halt anstrengend für die jungen Muslime.
Thanks for watching this video. If you like these type of videos, check out my other videos as well. Also don't forget to subscribe and click to receive a notification whenever I upload another video. I wish you a pleasant day.